People used to ask me after Earl passed. They'd tilt their head just slightly and say, "How are you doing out there all by yourself?" Like I was stranded somewhere, like alone was a diagnosis. I'm Annie. I'm 81 years old, and I live alone in a house I have owned for longer than most of the people asking me that question have been alive. I want to talk to you today, whether you're my age or whether you're somewhere in your 50s or 60s, watching this and already sensing what's coming, because nobody tells you the truth about living alone. They tell you to stay busy. They tell you to join a club. They give you a list. I tried the list. It didn't work. Not the way they said it would. What finally worked was something quieter. Something I stumbled into almost by accident, sitting in this house on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was coming in sideways through the kitchen window, and I finally stopped waiting for my life to feel like something again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first year after Earl was gone, I handled it the way I had handled most things in my life. I managed. The children called. I told them I was fine. They believed me, partly because they needed to, and partly because I had spent 40-something years making sure nobody worried about me. I was good at it. I was so good at it that I'd nearly convinced myself. I kept the house clean. I cooked real meals. I watched the news. I went to sleep at a decent hour. From the outside, I looked like a woman who had her life in order. What nobody saw was that I had stopped going outside. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once. It happened the way most things happen, gradually and then completely. First, it was just the cold weather. Then it was my knee bothering me. Then it was that I didn't have anywhere particular to be. And if you don't have anywhere to be, it starts to feel foolish to go out just for the sake of it. At least that's what I told myself. 6 weeks in, I realized I had not had a full conversation with another human being in 11 days. Not a real one. Exchanges, yes. The pharmacy, the woman at the checkout. But sitting across from someone talking. 11 days. I remember standing at my kitchen window that morning, looking out at the street. Mrs., whoever she was, from 3 houses down, was walking her little dog, and I watched her disappear around the corner, and something in me felt, I don't know how else to say this, envious of a woman walking a dog. That was when I knew something had to change. So I did what sensible people do. I made a plan. I had read somewhere, or maybe one of my daughters told me, that seniors who stay active live longer, that you're supposed to keep moving. Get out 3 times a week. Maintain social connections. I had heard all of it. It sounded reasonable. It sounded correct. So I signed up for a senior center program. On a Tuesday and Thursday, there were activities. Cards, crafts, a little exercise. They had a bus that came around. I went for 3 weeks. I want to be fair about this. The people were perfectly nice. There was a woman named Bertha who had strong opinions about canasta, and a man who wore the same green sweater every single time and laughed too loudly at his own stories. They weren't unkind. They weren't unpleasant. But I sat in those rooms and felt, I'm not sure how to describe this, like I was performing being old. Like we had all been gathered together because of what we no longer were, not because of who we still happened to be. One Thursday, they asked us to write down 3 things we were grateful for on little slips of paper. And I sat there with my paper and my pen, and I could not make myself do it. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because being handed a worksheet to prove it made me want to get up and leave. I stopped going. Strike 1. I should tell you. This is going to sound ridiculous, but in those months, I became genuinely convinced that what I needed was a project. Something to occupy me, something with purpose. I decided I would teach myself to knit. I had never knitted a single thing in my life. I was 78 years old. I watched 7 videos online. I ordered yarn in 3 different colors because the woman in the video said beginners should have options. I sat down at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with my needles and my 3 colors of yarn, feeling, I'll be honest, slightly pleased with myself. By Sunday evening, I had created what I can only describe as a beige catastrophe, something that was possibly a rectangle, if rectangles could be embarrassed. My youngest grandchild, when she saw it later, asked if it was a net. For catching what, she did not specify. I laugh about it now, but at the time, I sat looking at that beige catastrophe and thought, this isn't the thing either. This gives my hands something to do. It does absolutely nothing for the quiet. Strike two. The third thing I tried because my daughter Sandra suggested it gently in that careful way she has. The way she's always had, like she's approaching something that might startle. She said, "Mom, what if you called people more? Old friends, people you've lost touch with." She said it so reasonably. She was right in theory. I had a whole life behind me, people I'd worked with, neighbors from 3 houses ago, women I used to sit with in church, all of them still out there somewhere. I made a list. I called 6 people in the space of 2 weeks, and here is what I discovered. The conversations were exhausting in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not unpleasant, but we were all reaching back. We were all performing some version of ourselves from 20 years ago, and we had all changed too much to pretend we hadn't, and not changed enough to know what to do about it. One woman, we had been friendly for years, spent 40 minutes telling me about her health, her surgeries, her son's divorce. I listened. I made the sounds you make, and when I hung up the phone, I felt more alone than I had before I called. There was the problem. I wasn't lonely because I lacked contact. I was lonely because I was having contact that didn't reach me. You can be in a room full of people and not be reached. You can be on the phone for an hour and not be reached. I had spent a large portion of my life in that particular condition, and I recognized it immediately. Strike 3. I want to tell you about the afternoon things shifted. It was a Wednesday. October, I think, because the light had that particular low slant it gets in October, and there were leaves piled at the curb that nobody had raked. I was sitting on my front steps, not for any reason, just because the inside of the house felt thick that day, and I needed air. Denise from down the street came by with her daughter Kayla. Kayla was carrying a backpack that was almost as big as she was. They were walking home from school. I had seen them before, exchanged nods, nothing more. But that day, Kayla stopped at the bottom of my steps. She looked at me the way children sometimes look at things they aren't sure about, directly, without deciding in advance what they're seeing. She said, "Do you live here by yourself?" I said, "I do." She thought about this. Then she said, "Isn't that quiet?" I said, "It is." She said, "I think I would like that." And then Denise called her name and they kept walking, and I sat there on my steps and felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like myself, not a version of myself being managed or performed or handled. Just myself in a conversation that cost nothing and expected nothing and somehow said exactly what needed to be said. That is where things started, slowly, without planning. Kayla started stopping on her walk home. Sometimes just for a minute, sometimes longer. She would tell me about her day in the particular way children have, jumping between subjects, abandoning stories halfway through because another one seemed more important. I listened. I didn't always follow. She didn't seem to mind. Denise started stopping too, usually at the tail end of picking up Kayla, standing at the bottom of the steps with her work bag still over her shoulder, talking for 5 or 10 minutes before she remembered she had somewhere else to be. She never asked me how I was doing in that tilted head way. She talked to me like a person, like someone who had information she might find useful or opinions worth hearing. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being talked to like that. But here is what I actually want to tell you, because Kayla and Denise weren't the whole of it. What changed in me was something quieter, something that happened in the house itself. I started paying attention to the morning. I don't mean I changed my routine dramatically. I mean I stopped resenting it. For the first year after Earl died, I woke up every morning and the silence felt like an accusation, like evidence of something wrong. I would get up and make coffee and turn on the television specifically to fill the room with noise because I didn't know what to do with all that quiet. Then one morning, I couldn't tell you exactly when, it wasn't a decision, I made my coffee and I didn't turn the television on. I sat in the chair by the window. The light was coming in through the blinds in those thin lines it makes in the early morning, and my coffee was hot, and outside I could hear a bird going through some long, complicated song it seemed to be making up as it went. And I just sat there. That's all. I just sat there, and I let the morning be the morning. 20 minutes, maybe. Then I got up and I made my breakfast and I washed the dishes. But those 20 minutes, something in them had been different. Something in them had been mine in a way that didn't require anything from anyone and didn't require me to perform anything either. I started doing it every day. I still do. The other thing I want to tell you is about the house itself. In that first year, I let things go in small ways that accumulated. A dish left until tomorrow. Mail piled on the counter because I'd look at it later. A jacket over the chair, then a second jacket, then 3. I told myself it didn't matter because there was nobody to see it. And that is exactly where I was wrong. There was somebody to see it. I was seeing it. Every morning, every afternoon, every time I walked through the kitchen. The state of a house when you live alone is not about visitors. It is about what you say to yourself when you wake up, whether the first thing you see is order or drift. One morning, I stood in my kitchen and looked at that counter. Mail, a bag I hadn't unpacked, 2 mugs, a jar with no lid, and I thought I would not let someone I cared about live like this. I was someone I should care about. That sounds simple. It isn't. I started with 20 minutes, just 20 minutes a day after breakfast, going through whatever needed doing. Not deep cleaning, not anything drastic, just the daily honest maintenance of a life. Dishes cleared, surfaces wiped, things put back where they belong. What it did for me had nothing to do with tidiness. It was the first thing every day that I did on purpose. The first quiet declaration that this house and the person in it were worth tending. I also want to tell you about the calendar. Someone, I think it was my sister Gloria, she calls sometimes just to talk. Someone said to me once, you should always have something coming, something to move toward. At first I thought she meant big things, travel, events, plans, but I'm 81. My something coming can be Thursday. I went to the bookstore on a Thursday in November just to look. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I walked slowly, which is the only speed available to me these days, and I read the backs of things, and I ended up with a book about birds in the American South, which I did not intend to buy, and which I have now read almost twice. I looked forward to that Thursday from Monday. I thought about it on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I decided I would get a cup of tea from the place 2 doors down from the bookstore. Wednesday was a better day because Thursday was coming. That is all it takes. One thing, one specific thing on the calendar that you are genuinely moving toward. Not a commitment, not an obligation, a small particular pleasure. Every week I have one. The last thing. And this one I say carefully because it took me the longest to understand. Living alone does not mean living without. I spent so much of my life, so much of the first year alone especially, trying to solve the alone. Treating it like a problem, filling it, managing it, finding the right program or project or phone call that would make it go away. But alone is not the problem. The problem is when you disappear inside it, when no one knows your name that day, when no one would notice if something went wrong, when you could go 48 hours without being seen and nothing would alert anyone. That is the thing to solve, not the quiet, not the solitude. Those are not problems. Those, for the first time in my life, have become something I actually treasure. What you need is one person who would notice. One person who calls on Sundays or stops by on Wednesdays or knows to expect you somewhere. Not a network. Not a calendar full of obligations. One person, one connection with enough regularity that your absence would register. For me, it is a few people now. Angela calls. Denise stops. I have a granddaughter who texts me pictures of her cat, which I have very mixed feelings about, but read every single one. None of this feels like what the books told me. None of it looks like the senior center or the crafts program or the wellness plan. It looks like a Tuesday morning on my front steps, talking to a 9-year-old about nothing in particular. It looks like a cup of coffee I made for myself at 7 in the morning, sitting in a chair by a window, listening to a bird I cannot name. It looks like my house clean and quiet, and me inside it, at peace with the fact that this is mine. I have lived in this house for longer than I can easily count in years. I have raised children in it and watched them go. I have sat in it through winters that felt like they would not end. I have watched the neighborhood change around me and stayed, not because I couldn't leave, but because something here is continuous with everything I am. I did not know when Earl was still alive that I was capable of this kind of solitude. I thought I would need to be rescued from it. I thought I would need to fill it immediately and completely, or it would swallow me. It didn't. It turned out there was a version of me that had been waiting a long time for this much quiet. She had things to say. She just needed the room. If you are living alone, or if you can see that chapter coming, I am not going to tell you. It's easy. I will not insult you with that. But I will tell you this, there is a life in it. A real one that is yours in a way that few things ever are. You just have to stop waiting for someone to come back through the door and start with the morning that is actually in front of you. If you sat with me today, thank you. That means something. If you want to come back and sit for a while again sometime, I'll be here. That button below is how you find me. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.